Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, steel, steel, steel. No, not that old one. It's a different one. Japan's prime minister made a whirlwind trip to Washington, and President Trump tap danced while he was here around a possible deal between Japan's Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel. Here is what the president said, in part.
Nissan's going to be doing something very exciting about U.S. Steel. They'll be looking at an investment rather than a purchase. We didn't like the idea. U.S. Steel is a very important company to us.
To clarify for the president, Nippon, not Nissan. Meanwhile, Republican tension as Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson struggles to make headway on the president's, quote, one big, beautiful bill. In the Senate, Republican Committee Chair of the Budget Committee, Lindsey Graham, has released details of that chamber's two-part plan. There's a Senate dinner tonight in Florida, and the question that looms over that is, can President Trump get most Republicans in both chambers on the same legislative page? We'll find out. Plus, Musk's next target. Could the Department of Government Efficiency, as it's come to be known, set its sight in some way or another on the data at the Social Security Administration? What the president says about this potential move and how it might impact those who receive Social Security benefits. We start tonight with Ed O'Keefe and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Ed is at the White House. Caitlin's on Capitol Hill. Ed, this happens a lot. I just got handed a sheet of paper with new news about the federal workforce and an intercession by a D.C. federal judge. Let me read it to you, and then we'll discuss.
Yep.
Federal judge has ordered a temporary restraining order. For you legal beagles out there, that's a TRO. We're probably going to hear that phrase, that acronym invoked more than once in the next few weeks. This temporary restraining order would block 2,200 employees from being put on administrative leave. He will decide later tonight about the fate of 500 federal employees already on leave. And I note this in our note about this information, Ed. The judge pushed back on the government's quote-unquote findings that there is corruption and fraud, as alleged by the President of the United States. The government attorneys had no response. What can we make of this particular legal development?
That, once again, a move made by the Trump administration in its first 17 days back on the job has been at least temporarily paused by a judge. We should point out, by the way, this judge was a Trump appointee here in Washington who ruled this way, saying, you're not giving me enough information to justify doing this tonight, and not enough information as to why it has to happen so quickly. What's telling here is this appears to be headed towards a conversation in the legal space about what constitutes fraud versus what is potential waste or abuse versus what's just a spending decision that's not aligned with the current administration. You know, the new administration could have come in and looked at all of these different programs that were underway and said, let's not do these ones, let's focus on these ones instead. In fact, Secretary of State and apparently acting USAID Administrator Marco Rubio earlier this week, as part of his trip to Central America, told a bunch of U.S. Embassy's personnel in Guatemala that if you've got programs that are aligned with the goals of curbing illegal immigration, curbing the drug trade, boosting democracies in this part of the world, bring them to me, and those ones are likely to continue. Republicans over the last several days have cited all sorts of examples of USAID funding that went in modest sums, in some cases just 5 figures, to help fund theatrical production in Ireland that might have promoted Irish-American unity and diversity, equity, inclusion. Okay, that's an example of soft power, certainly, but given the DEI component, maybe something the Trump administration is not a fan of. Does that constitute or does that give reason to close the entire agency? The judge is asking that question now. Is that why you're doing this? And it sounds like, at least initially here, Justice Department lawyers didn't have a good enough argument. The good news, if you're a USAID employee or someone who's, married to or lives with or knows one of them, they still have a job as of tonight. Whether they will for the foreseeable future remains to be seen. But a lot of what they're trying to do here is being questioned by federal courts, and the Trump administration knew this and is inviting the legal challenges and wants to have them in court. And inevitably, judges will decide here in the coming months or years whether or not this stuff is legal.
And there's a legal question about appropriations from Congress and separation of powers. We won't get into all that, Ed, but I want to talk to you about what just an hour ago probably would have been the first part of our conversation. What the president implied, without details, is the future of U.S. Steel and the Nippon Steel acquisition thereof.
Well, and what he suggested now is that there's going to be more investment by Nippon in U.S. Steel. Not an outright purchase, though. And it was notable that he did not endorse the idea that that will happen. There are real political reasons not to. Labor unions in this country are concerned. Where they work, like Pennsylvania and some other states, steel workers, creates a political sensitivity for this White House. So by announcing plans for Japan to be able to invest more is one thing. Outright purchase would be another. Remember, the Biden administration blocked Nippon from buying U.S. Steel. It seems for now the current president, trying to find something in between.
And the Japanese prime minister notably said nothing. Caitlin, I want to go to you on Capitol Hill because quite separate from all of this other drama, there is the ongoing conversation that is reaching a kind of dramatic crescendo among House and Senate Republicans about how to legislatively proceed on taxes. What do we know?
Yeah, Major, with all of the executive orders coming from the White House, there's been a big question here about what Congress should and shouldn't, cannot do. The one thing that they have to do is fund the government. First of all, that runs out, money for the government runs out March 14th. So they've got to get some kind of continuing resolution or some kind of piece of legislation to fund the government through. We know how difficult that can be. Then they also have to set an agenda for the president's legislative priorities. Republicans have made clear that they want to use this budget reconciliation process to do that. That means that they don't, they can overcome a filibuster in the Senate, but that is really complicated. So basically, what's happening here on Capitol Hill is you have Republican leaders meeting with the president. You have Senate leaders and the whole entire Senate Republican conference actually down in Mar-a-Lago tonight to have dinner with the president. You had yesterday Speaker Johnson and Republican House leaders meeting with the president for over 5 hours to kind of get into the nitty-gritty details on this. And that's significant, Major, because Republicans have a majority up here in both chambers, but on the House side, it's kind of a majority in name only, almost. I mean, it's such a slim margin that they can't afford any defections. And so they have to be on the same page with the president when it comes to their budget priorities and how they want to go legislatively. And also, they have very little room for error within their own conference on this as well. So a lot of talk about this is the time for Congress to insert and exert its power. But how they do that still remains an open question. That's why you're seeing these meetings and they want to get going.
Right. Before you get the votes, you have to have a plan. And right now they don't have the plan, so they don't know how to get the votes. You mentioned a possible shutdown on March 15th. Speaker Johnson addressed that today in a sort of preliminary call out the Democrats effort rhetorically. Let's take a quick listen.
Leader Jeffries and others seem to be trying to set up some sort of government shutdown, which I think is very unfortunate. We were negotiating in good faith and trying to get the top line number, but so far as I know, they've been sort of unresponsive the last 2 days or so.
So, Caitlin, that seems to be the next drama.
Yeah, and the finger pointing has already begun. So what does that tell you? The reality here is that Democrats don't have a lot of leverage really on anything in Capitol Hill, except for when it comes to these sorts of things. They know that Republicans can't afford to lose any of their members, so they're not willing to provide votes really for anything. We also saw that when Speaker Johnson did negotiate with Democrats on a budget bill, his own conference didn't like that. Remember, Elon Musk kind of led the charge in blowing that up. So they have a very fragile majority. Democrats know that, and that's where you're seeing this kind of situation on the brink. But going back to kind of what we've seen from executive order standpoint, I mean, there's a big question up here about whether the government has funded some of those buyouts, right, that the administration is promising.
Right. Buyouts promised through September. Funds only available through March 15th. Thanks for making that point, reminding us of that. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Capitol Hill, Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Thanks so much.